been super cool. I have a ton of love for all the Pittsburgh homies. So once again, thank you so much for the invitation. I will try not to go on too long here, since anybody who knows me knows I could talk about both of these trips for probably like 5 hours apiece. So I will try and condense weeks worth of material into like 20 to 30 minutes. So let's see how this goes. So once again, thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Austin Gonzalez. I use he, him pronouns. I am a Virginia-based organizer of Puerto Rican descent and a founding member of the Richmond, Virginia chapter of DSA. Also, as was mentioned, I am a member who was recently reelected. Thank you to everybody in Pittsburgh who supported me. I am a recently reelected member of the National Political Committee, as well as one of its liaisons to our national level international committee, which has been my pride and joy this last 2 years. It's been so humbling, so it's been such a privilege, which is an understatement, to have been a part of all the amazing projects that we've done on our international committee. Once again, to say I'm extremely honored would be an understatement. Both of the trips I went on were so fascinating, so informative, right? I was able to be a part of our electoral observer delegation to Peru for their presidential elections that were held on June 6th. And I was also a part of our international delegation to Venezuela for an event that was known as the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World, which was held in Caracas. Both of those events I went as on behalf of DSA, right, as part of our delegations. You know, these delegations, I think it's important to point out, they're not possible without members such as yourselves, right? They're not possible without people believing in our organization, contributing to our organization, working to build this socialist movement that we all believe in, right? So once again, thank you all so much for continuing to believe and contribute to our organization. I also think it's important, before I kind of get into the real nitty gritty details here, I think it's important to do a little bit of an overview of why we even did this, right? Why did we even send people to Peru and Venezuela, right? What is the background here? What is the purpose, right? I think it's very important to keep all of that in mind. I personally am of the belief that international solidarity and international support coming from people within the quote unquote imperial core, within the heart of the military industrial complex, within the heart of the empire, so to speak, right, is so critically important, right? It's critically important for progressives, for leftists, for socialists within the United States to be paying attention to the rest of the world, right? To be doing what we can to link with other friends and allies in other parts of the world, right? Because it's our government's war machine, right, which is causing devastation across the world. So I think it's so important for us here in the United States to be cognizant of that, to be combating that, and once again, to be linking with folks across the world, to struggle together, right, to get to know each other better, and once again, to do what we can within the heart of the empire to support them, to once again, to combat the war machine, right? So going first to Peru, right? Peru was the first trip that I was a part of. Little bit of background there. The general political situation in Peru was very volatile. I arrived to a very volatile situation, a very polarizing situation. Peru itself had experienced a couple years worth of protests, of upheaval, right? They had gone through, I think at that point, 4 different presidents in the span of like 3 years, right? It was Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, who resigned as president of Peru in 2019 after a massive corruption scandal. His vice president, Martin Vizcarra, was eventually impeached by the very right-wing Peruvian Congress, right? And Martin Vizcarra, certainly he was no saint, but the conditions around the impeachment were very controversial and led to a massive protest movement in Peru around the same time of the George Floyd protests here in the United States, right? There was protests across the world, right? And Peru was certainly was not. Peru also saw massive protests, right? This protest movement in Peru, though it kind of began to peter out by the end of the year, it carried over into the presidential elections, in that at the beginning of this year, something very surprising happened. Something that many political analysts did not see coming happened, right? And that is a man by the name of Pedro Castillo, a man of the left, a former teachers union leader, right, was able to get the highest amount of votes within the first round of Peru's presidential election, and thereby entered the second round of Peru's presidential election, their presidential runoffs, right? And what happened was we met a situation, or we saw a situation develop in Peru where this presidential runoff was between Pedro Castillo of the Peru Libre Party, which literally calls itself a Marxist-Leninist party, quite remarkable, and Keiko Fujimori from the right-wing Fuerza Popular Party. Keiko Fujimori being the daughter of 1990s Peruvian dictator Alberto Fujimori. So what was happening is that we saw in Peru that there was this dynamic where, wow, a left-wing candidate going up against basically like a proto-fascist candidate, you know, an ally of Bolsonaro, somebody that the international right wing was really pulling for. And so myself on the international committee, as well as my other international committee leaders, right, we sat back and thought, okay, how can we be of most help in this moment? How can we, like Peru is a critically important country for geopolitics in the region, right? Peru is a resource-rich powerhouse. It has some of the highest reserves of copper, of gold. They have oil in Peru. They have some of the highest resources of zinc, right? Peru is the former, I like to call it the former seat of the Inca Empire, right? This is a major regional powerhouse. And not just that, it is traditionally a very strong right-wing ally of the United States and of business interests within the region, right? That is historically the case in Peru, kind of a legacy of the Shining Path insurgency of the 80s and the 90s, right? A very right-wing government has kind of taken hold there for a while. So for us on the international committee, we saw this as an opportunity, once again, to link with our Peruvian friends to say, how can we help you in this moment where they might have an actual, once again, neo-fascist elected president, you know, which would have been a disaster, but we'll get into that, right? We reached out to some allies we have on the ground in Peru, specifically from the Nuevo Peru political party. Nuevo Peru is a democratic socialist progressive political party that is a longtime ally of DSA. In fact, they even sent people to attend our national convention in 2019. So we've long been friends with Nuevo Peru. When we established correspondence with Nuevo Peru asking how we can help, they said to us, they said, hey, if you guys can send a delegation down here to help observe these elections, to help show people in the United States what is going on here, speaking to people in the United States in English about what's going on here, speaking to Peruvian media about election integrity, that could go a long way, right? And so we took it upon ourselves to do exactly that, right? We linked up with a couple different international groups and international institutions to make this happen, namely the Progressive International, which is exactly what its name says, right? It's an international institution of progressive organizations, right? We linked up with the Party of the European Left, which once again, basically what the name says is this is the coalition of left-wing parties within Europe as manifested within the European Parliament, right? And we also linked up with a group known as ALBA Movimientos, right? Which is basically an alliance of South American leftist and socialist movements, right? These are a couple of the different allies that we worked with to try and get observer accreditation, to try and begin the process of actually linking up with allies and political leaders on the ground in Peru, once again, to actually let these people know that, hey, we are socialists, we are leftists from the United States, and we care about Peru, we care about the rest of the world. We want to do what we can to actually link up with folks, right? So interestingly enough, you know, I mentioned, talking about the actual experience itself, right? I mentioned at the top how this was a very polarizing atmosphere. Literally, as soon as I landed in Lima, Peru, the first political billboard I saw in big letters on top of like a skyscraper, it said, 5 días para votar no al comunismo. 5 days to vote no to communism. That's how polarizing the atmosphere was in Peru. That's the kind of campaign that the right wing was running against Pedro Castillo, saying, oh my goodness, this is a communist. He's a Shining Path enthusiast. He's a terrorist, right? Things like that. Very negative campaigning we saw in Lima, which is not a surprise to us, right? Seeing this come from the right wing. Our DSA observer delegation consisted of 5 people, right? Myself and Abdullah Yunus from the NPC. We also had a rank and file Peruvian DSA member, and we also had 2 elected officials with us, Carlos Ramirez Rosa from the Chicago City Council and Marcela Mitines from the New York State Assembly, who's also of Peruvian descent, right? So we had a nice little healthy balanced delegation with us. In Peru, we met with so many different people. We met with all of the major labor unions, right? I got, oh yeah, right here, here's a gift the Peruvian Construction Workers Union gave us, a nice little bag with, you know, indigenous colors. It says Peru on it. Oh my goodness, beautiful. We met with, one of the most humbling meetings that I like to point out was we met with a group of people known as the Ronderos, right? The Ronderos are essentially campesino self-defense leaders, right? What the hell does that mean? What that means is that these are people who essentially provide self-defense for rural communities, usually indigenous communities, from both the government, from narcos, right? And from occasionally, you know, Shining Path type guerrillas, right? And these people were more or less people that are just trying to live their own lives. Talking to them was so humbling for me personally, right? Because I was so taken aback by how happy they were to see us, right? By how happy they were to engage with socialists, engage with leftists from the United States, right? For them, these are people who, as I mentioned, Peru is a country that has a deep right-wing hegemony. These are people that not only have they been completely ignored by their government for their entire lives, to just get an audience of people from the United States, it meant so much to them, right? So it was very humbling and very taken aback. It was a reminder of how important this is, right? How important it is for us to actually put our skin in the game sometimes, right? To quote unquote, use our privilege, right? To give these people a platform, give these people a megaphone. So that way people like me and the other members of the delegation can come back here to the United States and tell people what we saw, right? Tell people what we heard, what we actually engaged with. Now, once again, I could talk about this experience in Peru for an exceedingly long time, but I will try and speed up here so I can talk a little bit about Venezuela as well, which was also an amazing experience. On election night or election day in Peru, what we did was poll watching, right? We would go to different polls in different barrios in Lima. Luckily, the poll watching that I did, everything went off without a hitch, right? There was no wild incidents that occurred. There was no arguments or anything like that. It was very, very, very calm, very composed. Peru is a country in South America that is kind of has let me say, a more respected electoral process, right? This is also kind of a legacy of the 80s and 90s insurgency. After the dictatorship of Fujimori, right? Elections were kind of, they're known to be cleaner, right? Let me put it this way. They are known to be cleaner than countries like Colombia, right? Which definitely does not have clean elections, but that's a whole nother conversation. On election night, we were at Peru Libre's headquarters, right? Pedro Castillo's party, the headquarters known as Casa del Maestro, right? Which was amazing. It's amazing when you walk into his headquarters, and of course, you know, I got the giant pencil on me. When you walk into his headquarters, it's amazing. There were 2 giant inflatable pencils literally at the top of like a balcony. It was remarkable, right? For anybody who doesn't know, Pedro Castillo's thing is he carries a giant pencil with him wherever he goes because education for all, education for rural communities, right? That's a big deal for him. So once again, it was amazing to be there on election night. As soon as we saw early reports, as soon as we saw what's known as the quick count, which is a sampling of already counted ballots, it was clear to us that it was going to be razor thin, but that Castillo was going to pull it out. And the last point I'll drive home about my experience in Peru is that it was absolutely amazing. It was humbling. I'll never forget it. Being able to be with these people who have struggled in their country for decades, right? It was amazing to be with these people, to see them finally win, right? To see them finally get to a place where, okay, they're actually going to get the presidency, right? Which, once again, this is Peru, right-wing hegemony. I would have never expected this. For a little bit of context, I went to London a couple years ago for the election between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. And to say it was extremely depressing when the results came out, and I'm with all these labor people who are like, oh my God, Boris Johnson is about to be prime minister, right? Very depressing. To be in Peru, to see the exact opposite, oh my goodness, it is something I will truly, truly never forget. And Peru itself, it took a while for the electoral authorities to finally certify Castillo, but he has been inaugurated president. And it is quite a wild statement to say, but is fundamentally true in that the incumbent president of Peru is a friend of the DSA, right? We met him. We literally met him. I had a conversation with him. Nice guy, right? So that's quite remarkable. In fact, some of our allies in the Nuevo Peru party, which I mentioned earlier, Progressive Democratic Socialist Political Party, they're in his cabinet, right? Anaí Durand, who was our main contact on the ground, is now the Minister of Women for the Peruvian government, which is remarkable to me. So beautiful to be here for this moment. And to me, just the beginning of DSA's work on the international stage, as far as I'm concerned. I would love to do more election observer delegations. I got my eyes on Bolsonaro next year. That election in Brazil, oh, you already know we're going to send a delegation, but we'll get there. So moving on here to Venezuela, since once again, I don't want to take up too much of the time that you have given me here, which I do very much appreciate. Literally the next month, in fact, not even the next month, this Peru delegation happened the first week of June. This Venezuela delegation happened the last week of June, so basically in the same month. A little bit of background here, why we went to Venezuela, how we went to Venezuela, which is a whole conversation in and of itself. We have had a relationship with an institution that is known as the Institute of Simón Bolívar for about over a year now. The Institute of Simón Bolívar is a think tank that is based in Caracas, right? They do work as far as like analyzing data in Venezuela, data throughout Latin America, South America, throughout the Americas, I should say, which is kind of how we have this relationship. And they informed us at the beginning of this year that there was going to be a big grand event in Venezuela during the summer. The reason being that this previous summer was the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Carabobo, which was the battle that Simón Bolívar led that guaranteed Venezuelan independence. So this was essentially the 200th anniversary of Venezuela's independence. Because of this, they sent out invitations to socialist groups, leftist groups, progressive groups across the world to come and coordinate, witness like battle reenactments, things like that. And one of the groups that they invited was DSA, right? Oh my goodness, isn't that fun? So after talking on the international committee about, how will we be able to do this? Will we be able to send people? Is this worth doing, right? We came upon the conclusion that yes, this is definitely a worthwhile thing to do. A lot of big political parties are going to be there. In fact, even other groups in the United States were there. There were representatives from the Green Party. This would probably shock nobody. There were representatives from PSL, right? There were representatives from a lot of different local activist groups. Fight for 15 had people there, right? A lot of different groups. The experience itself, right? The experience in Venezuela. So we were there for 2 weeks. And we had an 8-person delegation, right? 4 members of the delegation were NPC members, including myself. 4 members from the delegation were international committee members, right? Members from both the International Steering Committee as well as the International Secretariat, which are the 2 top line bodies of our national level international committee. The 2 weeks that we spent there were, once again, moments that I'll never forget and moments that I'm happy to discuss. The first week that we were in Caracas, this was the week of the actual event itself. Once again, the anniversary of 200 years of Venezuelan independence. This had, oh my goodness, so many people were there. So many, over 1,000 different people. Like you name it, like different political leaders. I actually met Evo Morales at one point, which was mind-blowing, remarkable. Oh my goodness. Once again, that was amazing. And each time it filled me with such pride to be able to say to somebody like Evo Morales, yes, I'm here to represent the Democratic Socialists of America, right? It filled me with such pride. And once again, I think this was an amazing event to be a part of. We met with so many different people when we were at the actual Congreso itself. But for me, the real things that I will hold with me for the rest of my life, the real things that I want to impart on everybody else, were the things that we were able to do in week 2. Week 2 was somewhat similar to my experience in Peru, in that during week 2, we were actually able to travel the country and actually meet with unions, meet with communes, right? And I'll talk about that in a moment. Meet with working class Venezuelans, right? Actually ask them, right? So what do you think about your government, right? Here in the United States or outside Venezuela, you hear a lot of different things, right? You hear, oh my gosh, it's a dictatorship, it's authoritarian, oh my, what the heck, socialism's a failure, right? Things like that. So to actually talk with the people on the ground who are actually struggling to survive was a very illuminating experience, right? We met with so many different Venezuelan communes, I lost count, right? So what do I mean by Venezuelan communes, right? I think it's very important to provide this context here. In the last 10 years in Venezuela, there's been I would call a blossoming of the commune project, right? What is the commune project? Well, the communes are exactly what that name means, right? These are essentially, let me give an example. This is the best way to explain it. Let me give an example. An example I usually give people to explain the communes is El Maizal, which is probably one of the most famous communes in Venezuela. El Maizal is a giant corn commune. They make and produce corn. Corn, of course, being very important to the Venezuelan diet, like many Latin American countries, right? At El Maizal, this is a massive corn commune where people make corn. Not just that, everybody who works on this commune, they vote on the decisions they make, right? They volunteer how many hours they're going to contribute. Any proceeds they get from the corn, they hold in common in a communal bank, right? For me, this is quite literally workers owning the means of their own production, right? And this was a commune that I had heard about before I went to Venezuela. Like I said, this is a very famous place, El Maizal, which is in Portuguesa state, which is in like the western part of the country. To actually go there, to actually go to some of these communes and meet these people was remarkable in that I truly learned and began to grasp that these communes, like, I always think of these communes as like specializing in something, right? El Maizal, they make corn. There's also another very famous commune in Caracas known as the Pioneros, the pioneers, who are basically squatters. They squat on unused land and like build houses and stuff. That's amazing. But what I really came to learn when we went into the countryside and visited some of the rural communes, specifically we went to the state of Anzoátegui, which is about 5 hours east of Caracas. Caracas being in the center of the country near the coast. When we went to Anzoátegui, I began to truly learn and began to truly grasp how right now, in a lot of ways, because of how devastated the Venezuelan economy is, right? Both from U.S. sanction and blockade, as well as from the decline in the price of oil, right? Because of how devastated the Venezuelan economy is, I truly began to learn that these communes, they do almost everything. They do almost everything, right? We went to a commune in Anzoátegui known as Comuna Luisa Cáceres, right? And not only did they make corn and make their oon food, they made their own clothes, right? They had like textiles where they make their own clothes. They had like a security guard guy who was like their self-defense. They would take like old materials and recycle them to create like corn processing, like facilities out of like trailers. It was remarkable. They do everything. They do everything, right? As I mentioned, they have a communal bank where they hold things in common. They have like a little medical facility where I know a couple of the communes, these medical facilities are literally staffed by Cuban doctors, right? That probably wouldn't surprise people either, right? And it's amazing how these communes are, once again, they're these like, it's like, I hate to get too dramatic here or too hyperbolic, but like it really felt like witnessing like the withering away of the state, so to speak, like in real time, almost as a necessity, right? Because of how devastated the economy is and because the government in many ways cannot provide for its people right now. So these people essentially have to take things into their own hands and create, once again, their own, once again, I don't want to get too dramatic and call them their own states, but like, once again, the communes were telling us how like, and these communes consist of thousands of people. The communes were telling us how what they're beginning to do now is that different like communes that are adjacent to each other are beginning to talk about like combining to create what they refer to as communal cities. So this commune project, which has flowered in the last 10 years, we're only at the tip of the iceberg, right? Is what it felt like. But what was so remarkable, and I'll wrap up here in a moment, what was so remarkable was, once again, talking to these people about their government, right? Talking to these people about their view of socialism, their view of the commune project, what they think they're doing, right? And they would tell us that it was remarkable to me how nuanced their opinions were, right? They did not see things as black and white. They would say things like, yeah, you know, we recognize that Venezuela fundamentally is a capitalist society, right? It relies on oil to exist for the most part, right? And they would tell us how what they are trying to build on the ground is a transition away from capitalism, right? They would tell us how the project is difficult. Sometimes it's messy, right? It's not linear, right? They would tell us how, yeah, you know, though they are supportive of the government, right? Because the government continues to support the commune project, they would come in conflict with the government at times, right? For example, say you're in El Maizal, right? The giant corn commune. And once again, the corn that you produce is depending on the, like essentially the volunteer labor of the comuneros. Say your local bureaucrat is a little, your local government bureaucrat is a little upset that corn production is not increasing, right? That, oh no, our economy is devastated. We need more corn to produce so we can sell more and so we can get the economy up and running. Your local commune, right, is people that are voting on these decisions. They don't want to listen to some government bureaucrat telling them, oh no, you need more efficiency, you need more production, right? These people, once again, decide these things by themselves. So very often, communes do come in conflict with kind of like your local party bureaucrat or whatever. So to me, that's also a very fascinating example of, once again, the role of the state in facilitating a transition to socialism, right? Where the state, you know, fails, where the state succeeds. Fundamentally, I look at a country like Venezuela, and this is kind of one of the last things I'll say here. Fundamentally, I look at a country like Venezuela, the experience in Venezuela, and think, rather than, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh my goodness, the economy is devastated. Clearly, there's nothing to learn here. No. I say there's a lot to learn from them, right? Both their successes and their failures, right? How did this socialist movement get to this place where they were able to come into power in Venezuela and have such a deeply entrenched control over the state, right? How did the economy get devastated? Is it, you know, U.S. sanction and coercion? Is it mistakes that the government made? Of course, I would say it's definitely both, right? But once again, the last thing I would say is, impart on everybody is, look at how important it is to be going to these places, right? To be meeting with these people, to be learning from these people. Very much like Peru. When I was in Venezuela, so many people, they were just so happy to meet with socialists from the United States, right? They were just so happy to see that people from the United States actually care, right? They were just so happy to say, oh my goodness, you actually want to listen to Venezuelans, right? You're not just going to listen to your news media and just, oh, okay, I'm done, right? No, you're actually going to talk to us, right? That mattered so much to them, right? So once again, I could go on for hours and hours about this and talk in greater detail. And I know I can probably put my information somewhere if anybody does have questions or wants to reach out to me or anything like that. I once again thank you all so much for your time. I have so much love for all of the homies up in Pittsburgh. One of these days, I mean, Jesus, this pandemic is so depressing, but one of these days I am going to go up to Pittsburgh. I am going to party it up with the Yinzers. Maybe I'll even have some pop while I'm up there, right? Something like that. But once again, thank you all so much for your time, and it's an honor to be here.